You were right on, like on cue.
I guess we'll find out. Huh?
Well, welcome to the second SARA meeting of 2021. Just want to remind everybody, masks are required. That's a Schenectady County rule, not a club rule, and we don't want to jeopardize our access to this fine facility. Do we have any new attendees except obviously our speaker tonight or anybody who was upgraded? Yes.
I've been here in a long time. What's your call? Larry Zurab, KB2 WZT.
You've been here forever, Larry.
Yeah, I haven't been here in this meetings in a long time.
And we haven't seen you with the new preparation.
Yes, and yourself. Yeah.
Myself, hi. My name is Ridge, KB2HWL, and I understand I'm a new member here. Well,
Welcome.
I don't know how y'all vote people in, but I sent y'all a bunch of money.
You're in.
That makes them happy.
Now, is somebody sending around the attendance sheet? That's the advantage of having notes this time. The first time I didn't. And any public service events to announce?
Public patrols coming up October 30th and 31st. I believe we still need some operators to help out. More is better. So if you're willing to sit on a bridge, get a hold of JJ. ntuzq@arrl.net. Christmas parade. Oh, Larry, you can follow
Yeah,
that.
sorry, you didn't see me hold my hand up.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, the holiday parade's coming up the weekend before Turkey Day there, and I'm the Schenectady County
Sign me in.
coordinator and contact for the parade. We need Aries is looking for at least about 8 more operators that are that got good handheld and extra battery to walk the parade. So that's what we're looking for. Anybody needs to get a hold of me, it's kb2wzt@gmail.com. And I try to get a commitment by everybody by around the 22nd.
Thank you, Larry. As always, our treasurer, Tim Long, cheerfully accepts dues.
Cheerfully accepted, $20 cheap.
Wow. Cash only.
No.
No.
I'll take anything but Venmo, and
You don't do crypto?
I don't do Bitcoin. I don't do PayPal.
Okay, we have a couple of announcements which are make me happy. We're starting the Broughton Award again. We discontinued it in 2016 because the fund was severely depleted and it wasn't sustainable. Since then, we've invested it and we've more than doubled our money, and it's now in a sustainable mode, so we can continue the Broughton for perpetuity as far as we can tell. Secondly, we have an announcement for the December meeting, which will be at United Buffet. Noteworthy is we're going to do it on the first Monday of the month rather than the third, as we've changed to. And the reason is we kind of want to move that away from Christmas. That might cause some interferences. Any other announcements from anybody? So with that, I'll introduce Jim Silva, who will introduce our speaker.
This is
Okay.
Bob from home. Will you be able to face the camera toward the speaker during the presentation?
Well, we can. Most of it will be slides, but at least we'll be able to make sure we get his, on screen at some point. We went through hoops to get the share screen right. So I just as soon defer a picture of Bryan until the end of the slides. How's that? So we don't want to take too much more time, but it's also an inducement. Oh, sorry. I'm probably speaking 90 degrees away from the mic. It's also an inducement to maybe, encourage some of the folks to attend in person. I mean, certainly if you can, you're more than welcome. We are enjoying this nice facility, nice overhead projector, et cetera. So Bryan, the first time I met Bryan was at the East Greenbush Ham Fest. I mean, I'm sure we've met in the past, but at least I think I've never seen anyone so busy. I thought I was busy, but it's watching Bryan at the Ham Fest, that was a sight. Thanks again for hosting that Ham Fest. We had a great time. I contacted Bryan, somewhere during the summer about would you possibly give a talk? And I was very pleasantly surprised. He got back right away and he told me about this new book that he's working on. You'll hear about that tonight. I think I don't want to take up any more of Bryan's time. So Bryan, tell us a little bit about the Titanic and the impact of radio on the whole.
I can do that. Should I come up this way?
Sure. And think in terms of maybe
Alrighty.
there's the mic. So whatever's comfortable. Yes.
And I have a clicker and I'm all set, I guess.
Yeah,
We should probably ask people to at home to mute their microphones and not mute unless you have something to say, so we don't have to listen to the chair squeakers and all that.
Yeah, did you hear that on the folks that are at home? Please mute your mics and then we'll figure out whatever Bryan wants to do in terms of questions during the talk or wait until after the talk. What do you think?
Probably after we can open up to questions if
Yeah.
anybody has any.
That sounds good.
It would be good for people in here to use their cell phones.
Sure.
That works. So, well, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to join. I'm going to warn you, you guys are going to be guinea pigs here because part of my contract with the publisher is that when the book is finally published, they're expecting me to do a book tour of sorts. So we'll see how this works. I've probably worked on this book for the better part of a couple of years. And the genesis of it and the basis of it is I brought together all of the various circumstances that doomed the Titanic. Some of them are well known. Almost everybody knows it hit an iceberg, but there was a lot that led up to that. And that's what the book pretty much kind of goes into, all the various circumstances that led to this disaster. Next year will be 110 years since the sinking, and Titanic seems to hold people's interest as much today as it did when it first happened in 1912. The piece that I'm going to focus on tonight is one of the chapters of the book about the role the wireless played. But before we get to that, I always find it kind of interesting that in doing the research, and I've kind of got hooked on the Titanic in 7th grade. I had to do a book report. I hated doing book reports. I don't know if you remember, they used to have Scholastic books. They would send around a flyer, you could pick a book. But we had to pick a book, and I saw this book called A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. It had a little synopsis about the Titanic. I thought, well, maybe that's interesting. So that's the book that I got for 50 cents. And I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. It was the first book I ever picked up and it fascinated me. It's really a great book. It's a great read even today because Walter Lord basically documented minute by minute what happened that night. And so that kind of hooked me, and I've kind of always had an interest in the Titanic ever since. Kind of like buying a new car and then driving it right into a phone pole. So in doing my research over the years, I found that the Titanic was doomed before it ever left the dock. It was doomed before it ever came off the draftsman's drawing board. And there's a couple of things behind that that I thought I would get into before we get into the wireless piece of it. And Titanic was designed along with two sister ships, the Olympic, which was built first, and the Titanic. And then there was a third ship called the Britannic. And the idea was that the Cunard line was really denting the White Star line badly, the transatlantic traffic. It had the Mauritania, the Lusitania. And so the head of the White Star line was a fellow by the name of Bruce Ismay. And he decided it was time for the White Star line to step up to the plate and come up with some ships that would really be competitive with Cunard. And he decided that
Like we
came
lost
up
the
with what
audio.
they called, excuse me?
We've lost all audio.
Uh-oh. The red light is on.
I see.
It's back now.
Is it back on? Okay.
Okay, I see the green.
While you're there, Jim, could you turn the camera so we can see the speaker speaking? Is that possible? If it can't, don't worry about it, but we're just seeing the ceiling.
I'll do something.
It's no big deal.
Don't add
But
a
if-
new device, you're just asking for it.
Okay.
Where's the camera? Is it here?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, turn the screen.
Let's turn the laptop, I
Okay,
guess.
but we have to give up screen sharing.
We have to start over.
Actually,
Will that work?
yeah.
Yeah, we can see him.
That's
Okay.
great now. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
In the gallery. Okay, got it.
So Bruce Ismay gave him the contract and said, go ahead and build it. And this is where some of the circumstances came in that would doom the Titanic. When Ismay saw the drawings, he immediately threw not a fit, but he said, this isn't going to work. Titanic was designed to be, in the Olympic, 16 watertight compartments. You could flood any two adjacent compartments, or you could ram the ship and breach the first four compartments, the ship would still float. And the idea was originally that these bulkheads would, of course, give you the watertight seal. Well, Ismay saw those bulkheads and decided this isn't going to work. He wanted the first and second class spaces on the ship to be very open and luxurious. And he said, I don't want all these bulkheads in the way. So the designers lowered some of those bulkheads. And some of the bulkheads are only 10 feet over the water line. But still, you could ram the front of the ship, flood the first four, or any two adjacent compartments, and the ship would float. Unfortunately, when they hit the iceberg, they opened 5 compartments, and the rest of it was like an ice cube tray. It just went one over the other. So that was the first mistake. The Titanic also had davits that could hold, each davit could hold 3 lifeboats. Ismay saw that and said, no, 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 no. I don't want all these lifeboats cluttering up this beautiful ship. So instead of 48 lifeboats, which the davits were capable of holding, they cut it back to 16. 16 plus 4 collapsibles that had canvas sides that were mounted on top of the wheelhouse. The 16 lifeboats each held 64 people. The problem was that the Titanic could hold as many as 3,500 people. 16 lifeboats only held 1,178 people. So obviously there was not room for everyone. But the thought was at the time that the Titanic basically was its own lifeboat, because you could damage 2 compartments, flood the first 4, it would still float. And the lifeboats would simply be used to move people from the stricken ship to a rescue ship. And there was a lot of traffic on the North Atlantic lines at that time. So they figured there's always going to be another ship within reasonable distance that could pick people up. The thing is that 16 lifeboats met the standard, the legal standard at the time, the legal requirement. Ships were required to have lifeboats based on their tonnage, not on the number of passengers. That had been passed in the late 1800s. Ships at that time were about 10,000 tons. That was pretty much the largest ship you had. By the time the Titanic and the Olympic come around, you're up to over 46,000 tons, but you still only need 16 lifeboats to meet the law. So that was the other thing that created a huge disaster for the ship. So what role did wireless play in the Titanic? Well, this is the book. So they tell me. I don't have a publication date yet. And one of the chapters is on the role that wireless played in the ship. Let's see if it'll, I have to hit one of these, I guess, right?
Yeah, right.
Is it the up one? The side one?
It's,
How about if it's this one? No?
It's the space bar.
Not the.
yeah.
You have to click on the PowerPoint. slide.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not
Not the focus window.
Oh, wait a minute.
Click in the slide.
Oh, yeah. On the slide itself, maybe?
Yeah, anywhere on the slide.
Just anywhere on the slide itself, try it.
Click there.
Then advance it.
Work there.
There we go. Anyway, there was an omen that this was not going to be a very enjoyable trip for the Titanic. Titanic's radio room, this is the only known picture of it in operation. The operator sitting there, Titanic's call sign was MGY. And as I say, there was a priest on board the ship, Father Brown. He was an avid photographer, and he got the only pictures of the ship while it was underway. He boarded the ship in Southampton. The ship went from Southampton to Cherbourg, France, picked up more passengers, went to Cobb, which is now it's Cobb, it's Queenstown back then in Ireland, picked up its last passengers before it headed to New York. Father Brown got off in Queenstown with his camera and had the pictures with him. He actually was befriended by a couple from New York who offered to pay his passage all the way to New York. And he contacted the bishop using the wireless to ask if it would be okay if he went with these people to New York. And the bishop wired him back and said, get the hell off that ship now. And so he did and took his pictures with him. But MGY was the call sign. The omen was the captain of the Cunard liner Carmania, when he got to New York, was quoted as saying, I've never seen ice so far south. And that pretty much, as you will see, was the result of the tragedy. And I should go back just for a second. I was saying that the Titanic was doomed before it left. Its sister ship was the Olympic, went into service in 1911, about a year before the Titanic. These ships at the time were the largest man-made moving objects, and they really didn't understand the physics behind them. Now, if you've ever been on a boat, you see how the water comes back in as the boat moves, and the water comes into where the hull had displaced it. Well, the Olympic was on its 5th trip to New York, and it was heading out of Southampton, and there was a British cruiser called the Hawk. The Hawk had a reinforced bow that was designed to ram other ships in wartime. As the Olympic was sailing out of Southampton, the Hawk was maneuvering around behind it, got caught in the suction of the water coming back in, and the bow of the Hawk rammed the starboard rear stern of the Olympic, punched a hole in it. Olympic didn't sink, which of course led more people to think, wow, these ships can be in collisions and they're unsinkable. And by the way, White Star Line and Harland and Wolff never said the ship was unsinkable. There was a shipbuilders magazine that I think in like 1909 wrote an article about these ships with their design of the 16 watertight compartments and called them practically unsinkable. The media that did stories after that kind of forgot about the practically part and started calling it unsinkable. And White Star and Harland and Wolff never told people, no, that's not really it. They kind of let it go. So ice is seen far south. Back to the Olympic just for a second, though. When the Olympic got hit by the Hawk, the starboard propeller shaft got bent. They patched her up, got her back to Belfast to Harland and Wolff to get her fixed because they wanted to get the ship back in service. Doesn't make any money when it's not in service. And they said, where are we going to get a propeller shaft quick? Well, we'll take it out of the Titanic. That pushed back the Titanic's sailing date, which was supposed to have been in March, to April. And you'll see why that's important in a second. Here's the wireless tech specs. They had a state-of-the-art 5 kilowatt advanced synchronous rotary spark discharge transmitter. If any of you are familiar, and I'm sure many of you are, with spark transmitters, they're just brute force. Bandwidth goes from like 1 hertz to like 2.9 gigahertz. It just blasts it out there. The transmitter was set up with 2 separate rooms because the spark was so loud that the operators would not be able to really hear themselves. So the operators and the receiver were in one room, and the spark transmitter and the rotary generator and so forth were in the adjoining room. And there was pretty good soundproofing to try to hold it down. The wireless system itself, if you want to take quick notes and build one for yourself, looked like this. And of course, it was Marconi who designed this. And as I say, this was the state of the art at the time. Here's what the spark transmitter generator set looked like. This is out of the movie that James Cameron did. He did an exact replica of it. That's what it looks like today at the bottom of the ocean. You can kind of see the motor generator set and a little bit of the ammeter and voltmeter. And they're trying to actually recover this before it's completely gone. The ship is deteriorating pretty quickly now. And so there is a plan to try to recover this equipment. There were 2 Marconi operators on the Titanic. We had, both of them were not members of the ship's crew. They were leased to the White Star Line, as they were to other lines that had the Marconi equipment. And they traveled as second-class passengers. Jack Phillips on the left was the senior operator. Harold Bride was the junior operator. Now here's the North Atlantic ice in 1912. Here's the shipping lanes. The ice normally in March was far north of that. By the time the Titanic sailed, you can see how far south that ice had come. You have to remember too, there was no International Ice Patrol at the time. Ships relied on each other to spot ice and relay it by wireless. Here's the route the Titanic took. It left Southampton, went to Cherbourg, went to Queenstown, which is now Cobb, and headed to New York. And we're a little covered up, but right about here is where the ice met up with the Titanic. That's not to say they didn't have plenty of warning. The wireless did its job as far as giving warnings to the Titanic. 9 a.m. on April 14th. The Coronia wires, bergs, growlers, field ice, 42 degrees north, 51 degrees west. The Nordam kicks in at 11:40 a.m., much ice. 12 noon, icebergs, large quantities of field ice, 41 degrees north, 51 degrees north, 49 to 52 degrees west. And this came from the Baltic, which also wished the Titanic all success in its trip. There was a missing message. This is critical. Wireless did its job, but wireless operators didn't always do their job. This is from the Mesaba. It came in at 7:50 p.m. In latitude 42 north, 41.25 longitude, 49 west to longitude 50 point, well, you can read it. So a much heavy pack ice, great number of large icebergs, also field ice, weather good and clear. This is just a handful of hours before the Titanic hits the iceberg. This message never gets to the bridge. It did not have what was called a master servicegram designation on it. Jack Phillips, the wireless operator on duty, got this message, didn't say MSG, and he spiked it. Did not go to the bridge. So the crew is running at about 24 knots. They're running at almost top speed, which was the way it was done back then. Until you saw ice, until you had some reason to slow down, you didn't slow down. And Charles Lightoller, who was one of the officers on the ship, later said at the Senate hearing, had they gotten this message, almost certainly they would have slowed down, but they didn't. They kept going. So this message never got to the bridge. There's another problem. The equipment on the Titanic, that 5 kilowatt spark transmitter, broke and was out of service for several hours. Now, under the Marconi rules, if the main transmitter died, the operators were to fire up a backup transmitter, which was 500 watts. Obviously didn't have the range that the main transmitter would. Jack Phillips and Harold Bryan decided they were going to try to tackle fixing the transmitter themselves, the 5 kilowatt rig. In the meantime, you have people on board this ship who are among the most rich and famous in the world. Wireless at the time is equivalent to internet today. It was something that everybody just thought, wow, we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and I can send a message to California. It'll go to the shore station at either Cape Race or Cape Cod and be transmitted over telegraph lines to wherever I needed to go. So while they're fixing the rig and they're off the air, all these messages are now piling up. They're coming down from the purser's office. It was a pneumatic tube system, and it was just one after another coming down with people wanting to send messages. So the Titanic's radio failed due to a short in the transformer. And as I say, there was a bunch of messages piling up. Messages like, hello, boy, dining with you tonight in spirit, part with you always, best loved girl. Another one, no sickness, all well, notify all interested in poker. And this one's a little block, but it basically is fine ship, loves the ship, and sends that off to somebody to say he's having a great time on board. So these are the kind of messages, and there's also business messages, and a lot of business people on board. Isidore Strauss, head of Macy's, was on board. The Astors were on board, people with a lot of money. And many of these messages, as I say, were just people just wanted to be able to send a message from the middle of the ocean because, you know, this is amazing. Here's a disastrous decision. About 8 or 10, well, just ahead of the Titanic is the Californian. Californian was a cargo ship, could carry passengers, didn't have any on board. It was headed to Boston with cargo. The ship had come across a field of ice, and Captain Stanley Lord decided, I'm not going to try to go through this ice in the middle of the night. We're stopping here. And he goes down to the wireless room and he says, are there any ships around us that we should let know that there's a lot of ice up here? And his wireless operator says, Titanic's about 50 miles back. Call her up, let her know we're stopped in ice and it's right ahead of her. And so Cyril Evans of the Californian at 11 o'clock sends this message. Say, old man, we're stopped and surrounded by ice. He sends this to the Titanic. Jack Phillips is inundated with messages he's trying to get out now that the 5 kilowatt rig is running again. And he snaps back. Shut up, I'm busy, I'm working Cape Race. He blows the guy off on the Californian. Another message that never gets to the bridge.
Aren't they different operators?
These, well, Cyril Evans is on the Californian.
No. Weren't they using different equipment or something?
I don't know. The California may have had a different, I don't know if they had Marconi gear or not.
Wasn't it that the Marconi operators weren't to be talking to other non-Marconi operators?
That was part of it too, in trying to grab the market, their market share. There was supposedly official rules that Marconi operators are not to talk to other ships, but most of them kind of ignored that out of the brotherhood of being wireless operators. But you're right, there was an effort to try to do that, to force people to buy one system or the other. At 11:30, Cyril Evans, who just got blown off by the Titanic, his shift ends. And so he goes to bed and he shuts down his wireless system. And a few minutes later, he's exhausted. He's worked a 12 or 18-hour day. He's off in dreamland. 11:40, Titanic hits the iceberg 10 minutes after he's gone to bed. At midnight, the captain comes down, Captain Smith on the Titanic. He's made a quick survey of the ship with the carpenter. The mailroom is filling up so fast. Thomas Andrews, who was the designer of the ship, is also on board as part of what they call the guarantee group that would make the initial voyage, work out any problems and so forth. He and the carpenter meet with the captain and go, she's got maybe 2 hours to live. And the captain goes down to the wireless shack and he goes, send the regulation distress call. Here's our position. See who you can get to help us as quickly as possible. Jack Phillips sends out CQD, MGY, and the position as the captain has given it to him. Californian is about 8 miles away, doesn't hear any of it. Cyril Evans has gone to sleep and doesn't catch any of these messages. Harold Bryan comes in. He's the junior operator. He, of course, hears all this commotion going on. And it's interesting. Some people felt the ship hit the iceberg and others never woke up. Really depended on where you were. But it wasn't a violent crash unless you were down in forward part of the ship where the water was coming in. But Harold Bryan tries to lighten it a little bit. And he goes, try sending SOS. It's the new call. He goes, maybe your last chance to use it. And SOS, of course, and I substitute teach now and again. When I have extra time, I always ask the kids, what's SOS stand for? And invariably, I get either save our ship or save our souls. And I wind up explaining to them, it doesn't mean either of those. It was chosen simply because it's a very easy pattern of dits and das to understand. Da, 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 da. So you could be a rank novice operator. You could have all kinds of static and interference, and you can make out da, 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 da. Just chosen. And CQD was still being used, but they were also starting to use SOS. And that's why Harold Bryan says, might as well use the new call. You may not have another chance. Another missed opportunity. At 12:15, the Californian's third officer is Charles Grove. He gets off his watch. He's fascinated by wireless. He thinks this is incredible. He started to pick up Morse code a little bit. And so he goes down to the radio room because he's going to see if he can tune in and maybe catch some traffic, news report coming from Cape Cod or Cape Race. So he goes down, and of course, he doesn't wake Cyril Evans, who's in the rack after a long day. So he puts the headphones on, but he doesn't know that you have to wind up the detector on the wireless set for the receiver to work. At 12:20, 5 minutes later, after kind of screwing around a little bit, he doesn't hear anything, puts the headphones down, and he leaves, and he never wakes the wireless operator. Had he been able to turn on the detector, he probably would have caught that SOS and probably would have gone to Evans and said, hey, I'm hearing SOS, you want to check this out? But it doesn't happen, so it's a missed opportunity. There is a lucky break, though. At 12:11, aboard the Carpathia, the radio operator Harold Cottam is also off duty officially. He's headed to bed. He's taking off his clothes and getting ready to put on his night clothes. And he wants to see if there's any news bulletins out of Cape Cod. And he hears Cape Cod saying it has private traffic for the Titanic. Now, if you remember, Titanic's working Cape Race. So Cottam says, well, I'll be a nice guy. I'll call Titanic and let them know they've got some messages coming out of Cape Cod. They should contact them. So he calls Titanic. And as soon as he gets a hold of Titanic, Jack Phillips comes back to him and he goes, come at once, we've struck a berg. It's a COD, old man. And here they are in the Carpathia, 58 miles away. And they're the closest ship, other than the Californian, which is down for the night. And Cottam runs to the bridge And the guys on the bridge don't believe him. It's the Titanic, it's unsinkable. They quit screwing around. And he realizes they're not getting it and he's panicked. So he runs down to Captain Rostrom, who's also in his bunk. And Rostrom was a real stickler for protocol and everything. Well, kind of bursts through the door, Captain. And the captain's like, what the hell's going on? Don't you know to knock? And he goes, sir, it's the Titanic, they're sinking. And Rostrom goes, are you sure it's the Titanic? Absolutely, sir. He goes, all right, confirm their position, tell them we're coming. And Rostrom goes up and gets the Carpathia turned around. And at the hearing that was held in the Senate after the sinking, they had a Senate inquiry in Washington. Captain Rostrom says it's merely by the grace of God that they even got the message. The whole thing was absolutely providential. I will tell you this, that the wireless operator was in his cabin at the time, not on official business, simply listening as he was undressing. He was unlacing his boots at the time, had his apparatus on his ear, and the message came. That was the whole thing. In 10 minutes, maybe he would have been in bed. We would have never heard the messages. And they were the closest ship, 58 miles. 58 miles to rescue. This is the Carpathia. Carpathia doesn't go very fast. It only goes 16.5 miles an hour under normal circumstances. So the captain goes, shut off all the steam to the passengers, shut off all the hot water, pump all the steam into the boilers, and he gets the old girl to creep up to 20 miles an hour. But it's still going to take 3 hours to get to the Titanic, which is going to sink in about 2:15. And of course, the passengers, you know, it's cold in the North Atlantic. The water was 28 degrees, salt water, so it didn't freeze, but it was 28 degrees. And now they're waking up and there's no hot water and it's cold, and he just told them all to get back in their cabins and stay there. Rostrom makes all preparations. He's got coffee going, he's got food coming out, he's swinging out the lifeboats, and he was given a lot of credit for what he did. And he turns the Carpathia around and off they go. Meanwhile, the Titanic is calling for help. This is the message that the Olympic received from Titanic. And again, wireless is being key here, reaching out for help. And the Olympic lets their home office know that at 11 p.m. New York time, Titanic sending out signals of distress, answered his calls. Titanic replies and gives his position. We have struck an iceberg. The Olympic is 505 miles away, so it's not going to be there. Although it offers to go to help, but it's not going to make it in time. This is the Burma. The Burma again, SOS, SOS, CQD, CQD, MGY. We're sinking fast, passengers being put into the boats. At 1:45, Titanic gets out, basically its last message that anybody can really read. And this goes to the Carpathia, and he goes, come quickly as possible, old man, engine room filling up to the boilers. 2:17, there's a garbled transmission. They kind of make out the MGY, they can't make out the rest of it. The power is failing on the ship. And that's the last message anybody hears. At 2:20, 3 minutes later, Titanic breaks in half and sinks. And again, the Californians 8 miles away. During this sinking, they're firing off rockets on the Titanic. And they call up Captain Stanley Ward on the Californian from the guys who are on the bridge, the watch on the bridge. The Californians stopped and they're like, there's this ship off in the distance firing these rockets. Well, what are they? Are they company signals? Oh, I don't know. Try signaling with a Morse lamp. Not the wireless operator, but the Morse lamp. Well, it's a beautiful, clear night. There's 1,000 stars in the sky, and you're 8 miles away with a Morse lamp trying to signal. And they go, oh, we didn't get any response, but she's sailing away from us. What she was doing, in fact, was sinking. And as the porthole lights went under the water, from their vantage point, it looked as though the ship had turned and gone away. They never went down and woke the wireless operator to find out what was going on. There's 2,224 aboard. Lifeboats will carry 1,178, and over 1,500 lives are lost. One of the problems too was a lot of the lifeboats left far less than their stated capacity. In one, there was around 20 people, could seat 64. The reason was, it's cold out. Why would you leave this big, warm, unsinkable ship and get in a little tiny lifeboat and go floating around in 28-degree water? I'll stay here, thank you. And so many people wouldn't get in the lifeboats. The other thing was, the captain gave the order, women and children first. The officer who handled the lifeboats on the port side of the ship took that to mean women and children only. The officer on the starboard side took it to mean women and children first. If there's no one else around, then men can get in. It saved the life of a guy named Tucker, who was from Albany. He was early 20s, he graduated college. His parents were very wealthy. They sent him on a trip to Europe for a graduation present and were bringing him home on the Titanic. He just happened to be on the starboard side of the ship, and there was no one around, and he was able to get into the lifeboat for and be saved. I met a guy who knew him. He was a child at the time. His parents were friends of this guy. And he said every time they went to visit him, his parents always told him, do not mention the Titanic, because he was embarrassed that, you know, he made it and so many others didn't. Carpathia gets on the wireless and starts informing the world about what's going on. Carpathia sends this message. Actually, this was sent by Bruce Ismay, who's the chairman of the White Star Line. Ismay also got off the ship. He was helping passengers get in. Again, it was the boat is about to be lowered. There's no one else around. He steps in the lifeboat. He is chided for that. He is, you know, basically just, in fact, the papers called him J. Brute Ismay because he saved himself, but he was the chairman of the White Star Line, and he basically, after this, was never the same. He became a recluse and kind of disappeared. But he does send a message to Isselfrank, and they had code names. If he sent a message to New York on the wireless, he would reverse his name. It was Yamsey instead of Ismay. And Isselfrank was Franklin was the guy's last name, who was at the White Star office in New York. He sends this message, says, deeply regret to advise you, Titanic sank this morning, 15th, after collision iceberg, resulting in great loss of life. Further particulars later. And so that's the first official word the White Star Line gets from its chairman that the Titanic is gone. The other idea was the Olympic wanted to come save passengers from its sister ship. And the Carpathia does send a quick message out. Captain, chief, first and sixth officers, and all engineers gone. They were all drowned. Also, doctor, all pursers, Marconi operator, and chief steward have all been lost in the wreck. We have second, third, fourth, and fifth officers on board, and Marconi operator. Jack Phillips, the one who didn't send those messages up, died as a result. Well, he basically died of hypothermia. Harold Bride also got off the ship, and he was able to get to a lifeboat and overturned. Remember I said they had collapsibles with canvas sides? Well, they couldn't get those off the ship. It sank faster than they could get those off the ship. They were supposed to take them down and put them in davits, but the ship was already down. So they tried to slide them off as the water washed up, and they weren't able to do it. So the collapsible was actually upside down, and guys climbed on top of that, and they pulled Bride up, and he was able to survive the sinking by getting on one of the collapsibles. As I say, the Olympic wanted to come pick up the passengers from the Titanic. And Captain Rostrom of the Carpathia talked to Ismay about this. And he goes, do you think these people who were just in this horrible shipwreck want to see the ghost of the Titanic show up and pick them up? And they decided that would be a really bad idea. So he sends this wireless back to the Olympic. It says, Mr. Ismay orders Olympic not to be seen by Carpathia. No transfer to take place. Rostrum. So they tell the Olympic, just keep, they were headed for Europe, just keep going. There wasn't a lot of news sent out from the Carpathia. There were some personal telegrams sent out, but Rostrum did send a note to the Associated Press to confirm Titanic had sunk, gave the position, and announced that he was headed to New York with the survivors. That's really about all the official information that went out from the Carpathia. And of course, there was all kinds of wireless traffic coming in, trying to get details and so forth. Another message, this is one from a passenger. This is being sent to William Mansfield in Washington Street, Morristown, New Jersey. Basically says, safe aboard Carpathia. So these kind of messages from passengers were being sent to let people know that they were okay. Carpathia arrives and has 705 survivors on board. Before pulling into its berth, Carpathia goes up to the Titanic's berth and lowers its lifeboats and returns them. As they pulled into New York, there were reporters on every kind of boat imaginable with megaphones screaming questions. Well, you see the press conferences at the White House sometimes, they're yelling at the president. They're all trying to get news. One of those who survives is Harold Bride. He had been on top of that collapsible boat. He's being helped off. He had frostbite in both feet because he's basically, his feet were in that freezing water for 2 or 3 hours till the Carpathia could get to them. Eventually, what they wound up doing was some of those lifeboats, as I said, didn't have a lot of people in them, or certainly weren't full. And they went back over to the overturned collapsible boats and got those people off. But they were still in the water for quite some time and suffered the hypothermia. The New York Times played it smart, and wireless helped them do it. The editor of the New York Times realized that the last message heard from the Titanic was around 1:45, and nothing had really been heard since that time. And so he figured, based on that, and if you remember, David Sarnoff was a Marconi wireless operator. He was feeding information. He had been monitoring stuff and feeding information, and said, well, the last time we've heard from the Titanic was around 2 o'clock, a little before 2. We haven't heard anything since. And the New York Times took a flyer and theorized Titanic has sunk and went with the newspaper announcing that the ship had sunk. And you can tell they had spotty details. They say 866 rescued, the 705, 1250 perish. And they were doing the best they could with what information they had. There were a lot of papers, though, that had information that the Titanic was being towed to Halifax, that everybody had been rescued. The Times was really about the closest of all, and used wireless to kind of figure out what had happened. What happened after the Titanic? Well, there were 2 hearings, 2 big Senate hearings. There was a Senate hearing and a British Board of Inquiry. And out of that, it was decided that 24-hour radio watch would now be mandatory on all ships. A secondary power supply would be mandatory for all shipboard radios in case the main power went out. Lifeboats would be required for every passenger. They got rid of the idea of based on size. International Ice Patrol was almost immediately established. The US Navy sent out 2 cutters and began what today is the modern Ice Patrol, which is done more now by airplane than it is with ships, but it was started immediately. Red rockets were designated as an official distress call. You saw red rockets, it was distress, because there was this confusion over what kind of rockets were being sent up by the Titanic on the California. They improved ship designs. Maybe the bulkheads had to go higher than 10 feet above the waterline. In fact, the Olympic was brought back and they gave it a double hull. They refitted the Olympic which was almost identical to the Titanic with a double hull, as they did with the Britannic, which was the third ship. Interestingly enough, the Britannic never went into passenger service. It was immediately requisitioned as a hospital ship in World War I. It was bringing wounded, was going down to, it was in the Aegean Sea to pick up wounded to bring them back to England. It hit a mine, a German mine, and it sank in like 45 minutes. So the double hull didn't really do much. They did try to beach it, but it didn't work. And it went down quickly. There was also an interesting thing. There was a woman, I can't think of her name. She was on the Olympic as a crew member. She was on the Titanic as a crew member. And she survived the sinking and was on the Britannic as a crew member and survived that. So she's the only person who was on all three ships, and apparently, I think they'd call her a jinx of some sort. Also, they decided that victims of things like accidents like this should receive higher compensation. A number of lawsuits flew, and the White Star Line paid a total of $664,000, about $941 per survivor. In today's dollars, about $26,000. Not a lot of money, considering Martin Harding and Mazzotti probably could have gotten more. There was a final word, and very poignant, from the Postmaster General of the United States. He said, "Those who have been saved through one man, Mr. Marconi, and his marvelous invention." And so Marconi really proved the worth of wireless and that it could save people. And also it showed where the shortcomings were, that you needed a 24-hour watch. You needed to make sure if you're going to send a message that's important, you put an MSG on it. So it was a learning experience. And of course, it cost a lot of people their lives. But Marconi, obviously, his stature went through the roof after this. And as you were saying earlier, there were competing wireless companies. Marconi pretty much kind of grabbed the market after that. Everybody wanted Marconi equipment. And that basically is it, gentlemen. If you have any questions or hopefully some new information that I was able to share.
Yeah, if you receive a question, repeat it because the
Oh.
microphone might not hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brian?
Yes, sir.
Great. Where are those messages today? Like, I know you got whole.
A lot of the, well, I'm trying to think, believe it or not, there was a guy just outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, who wrote he went to see the movie A Night to Remember, which was based on Walter Lord's book. It came out in 1956. The book was 55. And when you went to the movie, they gave you a list of all the people who survived with their hometown. He wrote every one of them, and they sent him. This is the watch I had on that night. This is the purse I had. This is the hat I was wearing. And he had it, a little museum in the back of his jewelry store over in Massachusetts. A lot of this stuff has been saved in various archives. To say where every individual piece is would probably be hard to say, but RMS Titanic, which became salvor in possession. And this is interesting. The guy was from Delmar. He was a car dealer, and he grew up, went to Delmar High School, and I think his name is, I interviewed him for a documentary I did on Channel 13 years ago. Tulloch was his last name. He filed and became salvor in possession and actually technically owned the Titanic. And then RMS Titanic, which was his company, and there was a whole bunch of disputes. He got forced out of it, but they're the company that had gone and brought up all the stuff from the wreck. And there's a permanent display, I think, in Las Vegas, and another one in Branson, Missouri, I think, where you can go in and they have plates, shoes that they brought up from the Titanic wreck. I actually have a piece of coal from the Titanic, because when when the ship broke in two, of course, the coal went all over the place. So they were selling pieces of coal. So I do have a piece of coal that actually came out of the ship. I was very fortunate too. When I worked at Channel 13, I conned them. I mean, I convinced them that I should go to Springfield because this guy would have Titanic conventions. And Melvina Dean was the youngest person on the ship. She was about 2 months old. And she would regularly go to the Titanic convention. I think it was 1986 when I met up with her over in Springfield and got to meet her, get my picture taken with her. And I have this big, beautiful watercolor of the Titanic that she signed for me. So it was very special to meet her. She passed away 2 or 3 years ago. She didn't even know she was on the Titanic until she was about 8 because her father drowned in the sinking. She didn't realize she was on the Titanic till her mother was getting remarried and sat her down when she was about 8 and explained what had happened to her father and so forth. And she did tell a fascinating story. They were in 3rd class. Now, 3rd class had, you know, if you were in 3rd class, by the time you got up to the lifeboats, they were pretty much gone. She was in 3rd class with her family. Her father was leaving England, and he was going to open a tobacco store someplace out in the Midwest and start a new life. And as soon as the ship stopped, he just realized something was wrong. And he got his family up, he got his wife and her brother and Melvina, and they all went up on deck. Well, they wound up on the port side of the boat. So men were not allowed in the boats. So her mother and her little infant brother and herself, she was 2 months old, were able to get in boats, even though they're in 3rd class, and get off the ship. But it was just because her father just sensed there was something horribly wrong that they got off. So it was quite an honor to meet her, and I spent a little time with her in Springfield. Anything else?
Can you hear a question from home?
Yes, sir.
Brian, this is Bob Saltzman, WB2ARK. We've communicated before. Just a comment. I've been a student. I've been a member of the Titanic Historical Society for many, many years. And I actually have a piece of coal that was brought up by the first expedition. I think the woman that you were referring to is Violet Jessup, the young woman.
Yes, Violet Jessup is the woman who was on all 3 ships.
Just an amazing story. She was very ill and it was hard to get a job and so forth. And so that worked out well. And then I would argue rhetorically, not argue it out loud, that I would actually credit Nikola Tesla and not Marconi with some of the successes of wireless. But again, that's another track. I've gone down that path actually with SARA before in a presentation I gave on Tesla, and the Tesla Marconi thing, and even bringing Edison to the loop is an interesting story, but great presentation. And
thank you.
Fascinating.
I think you're
insights.
exactly right. I think Tesla doesn't get the credit it should. They've named a car after him, and it's on my bucket list to go to the Hotel New Yorker and spend the night in the room that he lived in the last years of his life. In fact, I was talking to Bob today when we had dinner before we came over about Tesla. He actually died really almost penniless. He had all these patents, and he had worked for Edison, and Edison said if he could fix this problem that he was having, he'd give him $50,000. I think it was either with a generator or a motor. Tesla fixed it. Goes to Edison and goes, okay, where's my 50 grand? And Edison goes, oh, you don't understand American humor. Well, with that, Tesla quits and goes off on his own and winds up hooking up with Westinghouse. And the contract he signed with Westinghouse for AC was, I believe he was going to get $2.65 per kilowatt hour generated. And when Westinghouse ran into financial problems, he handed all of his patents over to Westinghouse and said, they're yours, they're free. He didn't charge him anything for them. And Westinghouse did provide him with a little bit of money in the later years of his life. And they did pay the bill at the Hotel New Yorker, I believe. But you can go and stay in the room that he lived in. And at the end, he was sitting in the park feeding pigeons. And he never really did get the credit for all the stuff he did. But, you know, none of this would be working. We'd all be watching television by candlelight if it wasn't for Tesla. So. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I've heard that when the Titanic was going down, the orchestra was still playing in
The orchestra played until Hartley, I'm trying to remember his first name, Wallace Hartley was the band leader, and he said, we've done all we can. It's every man for himself. And they said, no, we're just going to keep the passengers calm. And the music was played to basically try to keep calm.
I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you know, but the thing that really struck me was I heard that either the last song they played or near the last one was a hymn called Nearer My God to Thee.
There's two thoughts on that. Some people say it was a song called Autumn, and others say it was Nearer My God to Thee. In the movie Night to Remember, they play Nearer My God. But many people who were on said, no, I think it was a popular song at the time called Autumn. Here's another interesting thing about the band. None of them survived. 6 weeks after they all perished, their families got a bill from the company that employed them for their lost uniforms.
We know right where they are.
So, yeah. There is a monument in Southampton to Hartley and the members of the band. But, can you imagine you open the mail and, hey, you owe us 6 pounds, 4 squid or whatever the British money in pence for uniforms. It was pretty heartless at the time. Yes, sir.
A story that was told to me by a friend who is also a professor of metallurgy, that they were still learning about steels and the behavior of steels at this time.
Right.
And when those steels at that time are subjected to deform, which is what you want when you're in a car accident.
Right.
When the steels at that time were below a transition temperature, they would act in a more brittle manner.
Yeah,
So one of the concerns was that the supplier of steel was using a low grade alloy. I think it was too much carbon is what I thought he had said. And the material
I think it's
acted.
sulfur.
Yeah.
Sulfur, okay, thank you.
Actually, there's a chapter in the book about that, and it has some of the newer information in it, because when they went down to the wreck site and they were able to retrieve some stuff, they retrieved some of the rivets. And the common theory was that a finger on the iceberg just ripped open the side of the Titanic. And in fact, what probably happened was in the bow of the ship, they used manually installed wrought iron rivets. In the rest of the ship, they used steel. The reason was they could get these giant hydraulic rams into the main part of the ship where it was open, but up in the very narrow parts, they couldn't. They had to go in there and sledgehammer them. And the steel was too stiff for them to do it, so they had to use wrought iron, which wasn't as strong. There was another problem. Shipbuilding had gone crazy at the turn of the century, 1800, around 1900. And there was a huge demand for rivets. And they wound up hiring pretty much anybody to get their hands on to help make these rivets. And they had what they called puddlers. Puddlers were supposed to take the slag off the top of that molten iron. Well, a good puddler could get all that slag, which was full of sulfur and stuff, off. The new guys didn't have as much experience. And so a lot of the rivets that were coming out really had a lot of impurities in them, much more than a really well-trained puddler would produce. So what happened was you got the Titanic in 28-degree water. And when they hit the iceberg, those rivet heads just popped off. In fact, they brought some up and they put them in a stress test. And it didn't take much at those temperatures for those to shatter.
It's called being below the ductile
Right.
transition.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things. It's fairly new information because they were only able to pull the rivets up in the last, probably 20, 25 years and do those tests on them. But that was the theorization, was that the rivets up in the bow of the ship were kind of substandard from what they would have been otherwise. And again, they did not have the technology to drive steel rivets. They had to go up there and pound them by hand. Another interesting thing too, And this is, you remember at the beginning, you could slam the Titanic bow first into something, crush the first 4 compartments, she'd still float. You'd probably kill some people in the firemen's, bunks or the mailroom, but the ship probably itself would have floated. What they did when they saw the iceberg 34 seconds before they hit it. And there's a reason why they didn't see it ahead of time. There are a couple of reasons. Number one is there was a last minute crew change. The officer who had the keys to the binocular cabinet threw it in his briefcase and got off the ship and forgot about it. So they couldn't get to the binoculars. Although they had binoculars on the bridge, they didn't have them in the crow's nest. The night of April 14th, when they hit the iceberg, was absolutely moonless. There was maybe 5% of the moon. It was a brilliantly clear night, 1 million stars, but lookouts needed the moonlight to help illuminate icebergs. The other thing is the ocean was as flat as this floor. There were no waves breaking. That was the other thing that lookouts would rely on to see icebergs, waves breaking at the base of the berg. So by the time they saw the iceberg, they had about 35 seconds. They call on the phone down to the bridge and they go, they ring the bell 3 times in the crow's nest, which means warning. They pick up the phone, they call the bridge, iceberg right ahead. Thank you, hangs up the phone. And he tells the guy, hard to starboard. And the way the ships were set up then was you turn the wheel right to go left. It's been changed since then but the idea was he was going to go around the iceberg and then try to swing the stern out. At the same time, he says, full reverse the engines. So he telegraphs down to the engine room, put the engines in full reverse. Well, how does a rudder work? Rudder works with a nice smooth flow of water past it, right? And the rudder on the Titanic is actually a little too small for the size of the ship. Well, now you throw the engines in reverse, you got all this water churning up, the rudder becomes less effective. By the time they finally did turn, and even in the sea trials, it took almost 30 seconds to begin to turn the ship. By the time they go to turn it, all they've done is they've opened the side up to the iceberg. If they'd hit it straight on, they might have been okay. But instead, they wound up bursting open the plates to 5 compartments. And, the pumps just couldn't stay ahead of it. And they tried. All of the engineers died. All the guys who were down in the engine room, they kept the lights on to the end, the wireless running to the end. But none of them got out. Again, if they had perhaps gone directly into the iceberg, but were slowing down, they might have damaged the ship, but it might have survived. There was a ship a few years before that had done exactly that. It had run into it, but it made it into New York with the bow crumpled up because the bulkheads held. But on the Titanic, that wasn't to be. But if you saw an iceberg right ahead of you, what would you do? You'd probably want to steer out of the way. So although this information all came out at the hearing, no one ever blamed the crew. They didn't blame the captain of the Titanic. They did find the ship was going too fast for conditions, but that was traditionally the way they did it. Until you got into danger, you didn't slow down. There was also some speculation that they were trying to set a new record getting into New York. They wanted to beat the Olympics time. But Bruce Ismay said that he had never told the captain, that was part of the plan. Although the captain may have felt pressured, somewhat because he's got the head of the company on board. Interestingly enough, it was Captain Smith's final voyage, one way or the other, because he was going to retire after this. He was called the millionaire's captain. People would go out of their way to travel on ships that he was on because he was so well respected. He was interviewed and said, I can't think of any, thing that would possibly, in the age of today's modern shipbuilding, create a problem that, would be a disaster. And unfortunately, he was proven wrong, and it cost him his life.
Did they have any kind of lighting, like today's searchlight? This is World War One.
World War One.
Just barely.
2 years.
I'm sure they probably had spotlights for like docking and stuff like that.
But nothing in full-time service to survey the.
Oh, what was ahead of them?
I mean, maybe you couldn't see that far to make it useful. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the problem. And also it kind of screws up your night blindness. I was up on Sacandaga one night and I knew there was a pile of rocks near where I was going and I had the light out and I ran into the rocks and never saw them because the light gave me night blindness. So I think the idea was to try to make it as dark as possible and rely on moonlight and waves breaking to see things like icebergs. So, yes, sir.
During those inquiries, was anyone found at fault for not helping?
Well, you got to remember the British Board of Trade was the one that said, 16 lifeboats are fine. So they did not want to share any of the responsibility for this thing. So they basically said, oh, it's terrible, but they didn't lay the blame on anybody. The one guy who caught a lot of flack was Captain Lord of the Californian. And the only reason they found out about it was because they got to Boston and the Californian called up the next morning. You know, Cyrus Evans gets up, fires up the wireless, said he hears all this traffic about Titanic. He chimes into the Carpathia, you know, what's going on? The Titanic sunk during the night. Oh, well, we'll come over and help search for survivors. They didn't find any. And they wound up leaving and going on to Boston. And there was a crewman on board the Californian who leaked it to the Boston Herald that flares had been seen and the Californian never did anything. And so that's how the story got out that, you know, Californian was eight or 10 miles away and Captain Lord denied it up and down and said, you know, we didn't know what was going on. But he never really had much luck clearing his name. Even his daughter tried to clear his name after he died in 1962 and didn't have much luck with it. But if you do get a chance to go to one of the Titanic museums, it's kind of interesting. They brought up the whistles from the wreck and they have them mounted. And I mean, to go over and put your hand on those whistles is kind of, you know, at least in my case, it kind of sent chills up my spine when I did it, you know.
Big steam whistles.
Yeah, huge steam whistles. And they did fire them up once and you could hear them for like 8 miles. They were just massively loud. And as I said, the Olympic went back into service. The Olympic, ironically, didn't get retired till the 30s and actually earned the nickname Old Reliable. And if you see pictures of the Titanic and the Olympic and somebody goes, oh, that's the Titanic, very easy to tell. The Olympic on its first class promenade was open. And they decided that what happened was they going across the North Atlantic, they'd get spray and it would come up and get the first class passengers wet. So on the Titanic, the new and improved version of these ships, they enclosed the first class promenade. So if you see pictures, you can tell which is which based on that. The Britannic's easy because it was always a hospital ship, had a big green plus or cross on the side. The other thing that I was going to mention about the Titanic, and I've had a brain fart, so pardon me, it's just age. The Titanic had 4 funnels. If you ever see a picture or a painting where smoke's coming out of the last funnel, it was a dummy. It was used for some ventilation, but it was not connected to the boilers. They decided the 4 funnels made it look faster and sleeker, and so it was just cosmetic. It wasn't hooked up to anything. So the 4th funnel was a dummy.
You said they use planes now for the spotting ice. They still do that, or is it all like they have radar now, right? But do they still fly around trying to find icebergs? That's a question. I mean, you had this thing up there.
The Ice Patrol?
That's what you call it, right up there? Yeah.
Yeah, the Ice Patrol is still flying. In fact, once a year they go out and they throw a reef out the back of the plane where the Titanic sank in the approximate location. So that's a thing the Ice Patrol has done for many years.
Brian, got a question from Homer's. Sid Kramer, W2SID. Early this summer, we were fortunate to visit in Cape Cod. And we visited the Marconi site in North Chatham. Now, we thought it was fascinating. It didn't specify specifically the Titanic, but they had a section on it. It was a lot of it was World War II submarines and so forth. But if you want to elaborate on that, and some of the guys, if they are visiting Cape Cod in the area, it is a wonderful stop to visit.
Right. The original Marconi site is on Cape Cod as well. The only thing left is a few bricks, which I guess you're not supposed to take, but I took one anyway because I was like, I'm taking a brick. It's
Well,
Marconi.
that's Brian. That's the antenna site.
Right. That was the antenna site. Right.
But the building is still there and was used throughout World War II. 2 hours after Pearl Harbor, the Navy walked in and grabbed the site and kept it for the rest of the war for submarine work.
Right. Right. Yeah. There were several stations along the coast that Marconi had set up. There was one on Cape Cod and also Cape Race up on Newfoundland, which was a little bit farther east and was a little bit easier to make contact with, especially if you didn't have the 5 kilowatt transmitter. But yeah, if you do get out to either of these sites, I believe there's museums at both. Halifax also has a Titanic cemetery because a lot of the bodies were brought back in. They sent the McKay Bennett out. It was a cable laying ship, and it went out to try to find any of the victims. They found around 100 or so, but so many of them were never found. Captain Smith was never found. I don't think Harold Bride's body was ever found. Not Harold Bride, Jack Phillips, the other operator. So there is a lot of fascinating information about it. I don't know if that museum is still open in Springfield or not. I know that the guy who ran the Titanic Historical Museum passed away, and his sister was running it for a while, but she was getting on in years too. So, I mean, they had a pretty substantial collection of stuff that people had donated to them.
The Nova Scotia site, which we visited also years ago, both of them have ham radio stations. And both times we were either at Cape Race or in Chatham, there was nobody there running it. It was not open to hams. So I missed out on 2 times.
That certainly would be a fascinating thing and kind of neat to put in the logbook, I guess. Yes, sir.
And at the American Wireless Association Museum in
Bloomfield? Yes.
They have a recreation of
They do.
a radio room.
Yep, they do have a recreation of the Titanic radio room there, which is another neat piece that they have. So if you get out there, they've really done a great job. And they have I think they have a Western Union telegraph office that they've rebuilt. They have wireless. They have Armstrong's original FM breadboard transmitter that he had in the Empire State Building there. So it's a bit of a haul. It's probably about 4 hours, but it's well worth it. You could certainly go out and back in a day if you don't mind driving. But yeah, they do have that wireless mock-up of the Titanic as well. As I said, they're trying to bring up the original gear. It's because, yeah, there's that. There's a lot of people that are concerned about that. There was a wedding held on the Titanic. Some company that was they were going to do visits to the Titanic in a biosphere or whatever it is. And as a PR stunt, this guy won a chance to go down to the Titanic on it. And he goes, well, I'll go if my girlfriend can go. We get married on the bow of the ship. And they actually did that. And they caught a lot of flack for that. So, but they estimate that probably within the next 20 to 30 years, it's may well just all collapse on itself. The stern is in really bad shape. The bow is in much better shape, but they estimate the bow hit the bottom at about 35 miles an hour. So it screwed it up pretty good. And of course, what happened was, as all that weight, as the ship sank, it snapped the bow off, broke the keel. The stern actually went kind of upright and stayed for about 2 minutes, then went behind it, landed about a half, 3/4 of a mile away. And in between is a huge debris field of boilers and coal and plates and everything you can think of. Even, they found shoes and so forth where somebody probably was on the bottom, their body is long gone, but their shoes are still there. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to reiterate on what you had said in regards to the lookouts and seeing stuff at night, even though it may be a moonless night. Having stood many mid-watch on board a destroyer in the Navy, it's amazing once you acclimate to the dark,
Right.
what you can see in the dark,
Yep.
in regards to just the phosphorescence coming out of the water.
Yep.
It is, and we would have binoculars and scan the horizon in the pitch black dark. It seemed foolish at first, but when you realize that, your eyes can pick up an incredible amount of light even in the dark, that it's amazing what you can see, especially, if you're looking for just one little light. You see a mast light on a ship, and it could be just shy of the horizon. It's amazing what you can see at night in the dark. So yeah, maybe binoculars might have been a good thing up in that crow's nest at that time. Might have given them 30 more seconds.
And Frederick Fleet was asked at the Senate hearing in Washington, if you had binoculars, would it have made a difference? And he goes, yeah, I think we would have seen it. And we would have probably avoided the accident. But they didn't have them. The key was in a suitcase back in England because of the shift change. And another thing I was going to mention too, there were people who were really lucky, and like Melvina Dean and her mother got off the ship, and there were people who were not so lucky, although they thought they were lucky. There was a coal strike. Ships, many of the transatlantic liners were out of service and had been tied up because there was no coal to run them. They didn't want the Titanic not to make its maiden voyage. So what they did was they took the coal off all of the ships that were laid up that were owned by the White Star Line and put them on the Titanic. They also took a lot of their passengers and put them on the Titanic. So here's people thinking, and they didn't charge them any extra. So here's all these people thinking, oh my God, what a lucky break. We're going to be on this cattle boat, and now we're going to be on the Titanic. And a lot of those people were third-class people who were coming to the United States to make a new life and thought they had because third-class accommodations on the Titanic were better than second-class accommodations on a lot of other ships. And the food was spectacular. And these people just thought, oh, wow, what a lucky break. And then, of course, it just turned out to be anything but. But it was all because of that coal strike.
Great, Brian, thank you.
Well, I hope it was enjoyable, and maybe a few maybe a pitch for the book when it comes out.
On top of it, they were using it, there's still ones on the Mario Bridge that.
Oh, yes. It's interesting. If you're in Jersey and you're coming up Route 17, it says Tappan Zee Bridge, and you get 3 feet over the New York border, and it's Mario M. Cuomo Bridge. Jersey didn't buy into it.
Good for them. They're losing a lot of poppers.
Sure. Well, we sure appreciate your coming and talking to us, Brian. We've got a little token. This is the way we give honoraria to our
thank
speakers.
you.
It's not full of gold coins or anything, but
No, that's
it's got our call sign.
thank you so much.
Suitable for frame.
I should have brought a hat to these guys, but I don't think the treasurer might know. Am I on your roster, your membership roster?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I wanted to make sure.
Sure. Well, great.
Do I owe you dues yet again?
They're triply accepted.
Well, okay, I'll pay for 2022.
Sure. Well, let's give Brian a
Thank you much.
I don't think, I mean, we're all part of the East Greenwich Amateur Radio Club, and I know we did our hand test there a few months back, or whatever it was, right? And I thank everyone for coming, but we'd just love to have you come to our meetings, because we have a lot of, we'd like to have events and do things, and I think in January, we're doing an antenna building thing. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and one other thing too, and this is particularly, I think probably of interest to the Schenectady Club. I've been in contact with WGY, and I have offered to do a special event station for their 100th anniversary, which is going to be next February 22nd. And I sent them a proposal. They accepted it. And so,
GY Studios?
well, we're not sure where we're going to do it. And of course, they're clueless about a special event station, what it is. But when I put the proposal together for them and explained it, they thought it'd be great. So as I get more details, I'm sure you guys might like to join in and be part of that, since it's kind of the home base here. I don't know if we'll be operating out of our individual homes using a special event call, or if we'll set up somewhere. I tried to talk to them about setting up, and they're kind of nomadic. They used to be on Balltown Road, then they wound up on Washington Avenue. They're in a mobile home somewhere now. I'm not sure where the studios are. Obviously, GE does not own them anymore. But I think, given the fact it's 100 years, it'd be great to do something in February. The 22nd is a Saturday. The problem is it's in the winter, so it kind of screws things up.
22nd or 26th?
22nd, I believe.
22nd is February of 22 is a Tuesday.
Oh, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday is the 22nd, 22.
All right, I need to go back and check. It's
So the 26th is a Saturday.
okay. Maybe it's the 22nd. We were going to do it on the 26th, or I'll have to go back and see because it was,
How old are you?
hey,
Look, we're personal. I mean, we're in the same.
my wife is constantly take the garbage out, take the garbage out, take the guy. I'm like, the sun's going to explode. This is going to be a cinder. Why bother? So
They don't understand.
yeah, exactly. But I will pull it together. I do need to talk to them some more about trying to figure out how exactly we're going to pull it off and make it happen. But I'm
Just avoid their RF field.
yeah, my thought was we got to the transmitter site, but they'd probably raise hell with everything, Exactly. In fact, you're talking about the Cape Cod station being taken over by, I think, the Navy or the government. I interviewed a guy, this has nothing to do with the Titanic, but WGEO was their shortwave station over where the AM transmitter site is. And they would broadcast to Europe, and they had programming to Europe, which I guess they would sell advertising or whatever. But I interviewed a guy who was doing a show to Italy, and he said they walked in on Sunday afternoon and gave him a message that the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. And on his shows after that, he said he would get these messages that he was to read. He didn't know what they meant. Sometimes it'd be poems or some sort of a message that really didn't make any sense to him. And it was the government sending stuff to the resistance using WGEO. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. A lot of history over there.
Well, real good. If you haven't noticed our free table, and everything on that table is free, courtesy of mostly Rudy Jen. Help yourself.
Thank you.
My wife will be eternally grateful.
Actually, I need to redo the presentation. I didn't have my official hat on.
Titanic. Cool.
I actually have a life jacket from the movie.
Really?
Yeah, they were selling those off.
Oh, yeah, there's a little tray.
Yeah, I don't see the tray.
It's hidden away.
I found it kind of fascinating. The fact that those messages never got up to the bridge made all the difference.
I know you used it before. Where's that? That's the bathroom.
Up the stairs.
Jim.
You might want to use the lift.
Hey, hey, Jim, thanks for the punches.
Thanks for, oh yeah, you got them. Good, yeah. Well, real good. I hope they work.
Yeah,
So, great.
I've used some of them already.
Oh, that's really good that's good to hear. And it's just, every time I go into my shop or my garage, I find something that I didn't even know I had from either Clark or Rudy or Paul. It's just, so I think It is starting to thin out though, but my goodness, that was like a triple whammy.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, sure.